Hello, and welcome to this Fear-Ifter panel discussion on the subject of generative AI and audiovisual archives. This session is brought to you today by Fear-Ifter's Value Use and Copyright Commission. My name is Dale Grayson. I'm an independent consultant in television rights management and archiving, and I'm the chair of the Value Use and Copyright Commission. I'm joined today by my commission co-chair, Louise Brocht from DR in Copenhagen, and our colleague Johan Oomen from Sound and Vision in the Netherlands. And Johan will be moderating today's panel discussion. We've got an excellent team of contributors lined up to talk today. They come from a range of organisations bringing perspectives as television producers, public service broadcasters and global distributors of television content. And the speakers will bring their own personal insights, be that legal and rights, technological, production and program making, sales and distribution, and of course, archive management experience. We will make introductions to the panelists shortly, but first, a reminder of what we're here to discuss. Generative AI refers to the use of artificial intelligence to create new content like text, images, music, audio, and video. And generative AI models are trained on very large data sets from which they learn the patterns and structures and generate new synthetic content that has similar characteristics. More and more content globally is being created using GenAI tools, and audiovisual archives can be used to train data sets, should their rights and permissions allow it. However, accuracy, authenticity, and truth is a growing matter of concern. And generative AI content brings about new legislative and copyright and ownership questions. So audiovisual archives are being challenged to implement policies to address these points, but the archive does not work in isolation from its wider organisation and must collaborate with stakeholders to design its policies. In today's roundtable discussion, we'll explore generative AI considerations for those working in or with audiovisual archive collections. Today's session will be in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll discuss how to handle generative AI content and the matters of authenticity and ownership and the copyright challenges. In part 2, allowing your archive to be used for generative AI training purposes, what are the implications, the rights and the permissions to be considered? And in part 3, an audience Q&A. So it just remains for me to welcome you, our audience. We have over 200 registered participants from all parts of the world, with people from every continent joining us here today. And just to let everybody know, the session is being recorded and will be made available afterwards via the Fear-Ifter office. So if you have colleagues or people in your network who couldn't join us today, please do share this with them afterwards. For audience members, you'll be able to interact with Johan and the panelists for a short Q&A. I'll now hand over to Louise, who will explain that. And Louise, if you could then hand over to Johan to start the session, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Louise Brock. I'm the co-chair of the Value Use and Copyright Commission. And I want to tell you, as an observer, is it possible for you to place a question in the chat? And please put the question whenever you have in mind what to ask. And please put the name of the expert you want to ask a question to in the chat too. We won't reply at once. We'll wait for the Q&A section in the end of this webinar. And it's not possible for us to answer all the questions in the chat, but we'll try to wrap it up afterwards, after the webinar. So please feel free to ask questions during the session. And now I want to hand over to Johan Oomen. He works at the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision as a manager of the Department of Research and Heritage. And he's the moderator for today. So please welcome all the experts and Johan.
Thank you so much, Dale, Louise. So we have a really exciting hour ahead of us. And I would like to start by asking the different panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Gary.
Hello there, yeah, I'm Gary Woolf, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategic Development at All3Media International, which is the distribution company of the All3Media Group, which is a group of over 40 production businesses owned by Redbird IMI. My role effectively means that I'm working with new rights and new technologies. So I've been looking at the AI space for around just over a year now. Prior to that, I was looking at the FAST space and the AVOD space. So as new uses for our content rights become available, it tends to come to me to look at them, evaluate them, and see how we want to participate.
Fantastic. Let's move on to Richard.
I'm Richard Jolly. I'm an executive product manager in the BBC Archives, and we're working on rebuilding our archive technologies. So with the new data platform and new applications to discover the content and reuse the content in our archives. So obviously the rights positions there are extremely important, both in the discovery and the exploitation area. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Next up is Johanne.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Johanne Nielsen. I work at DR, the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, which is the Danish public service company. We make video and audio streaming, text-based news. I work now as an enterprise information architect, but I have a background as head of archives here at DR. I work specifically with some of our metadata initiatives, AI-generated metadata and the like. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next is Stefan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Stefan Kollinger. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at ORF, Austria's broadcasting company. My team and I, we are responsible at ORF for innovation strategy and management, establishing innovation management processes throughout the company. Also, we are responsible for AI strategy and are running multiple innovation labs where we produce pilot projects, support colleagues and departments in reaching their goals also, so to say. And I'm personally also the chair of the EBU Technology and Innovation think tank, where I have the honor to work with a diverse group of people throughout of Europe in regards of technology and innovation.
Thank you. Moving on to Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Hervey. I'm an IP lawyer with almost 2 decades of experience focusing on the enforcement and licensing of IP. I have a particular interest in AI. I'm general editor of the Law of Artificial Intelligence, which is the leading UK textbook, and I write chapters on IP. I'm a senior consultant to the UN, specifically to WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, on the topics of AI and IP. I emphasize I consult to them. I don't represent them in any way. And I'm also head of legal and policy at Human Native. We have a marketplace for licensing copyright content for AI training.
Yeah, fantastic. We will be exploring that as well during our conversation. Stephanie?
Hello. I am Stephanie Jenkins. I'm a documentary producer with about 15 years of experience making historical documentaries for public television in the US. And I'm a co-founder and co-director of the Archival Producers Alliance. We got started about 2 years ago. And as our first initiative, we wrote a best practices for use of generative AI in documentaries. We saw that generated elements, synthetic elements, were making their way into films, but there was no guidance for filmmakers about how to handle these elements or really how to think about them. So we published those in September, and they've been translated into 6 languages. I'll throw that in the chat so I can read it. And then this year we started an interest group with the Association for Moving Image Archivists and Archival Producers Alliance to help educate smaller archives, mostly in the US, though also internationally, about how to think about generative AI. And the goal of that group is to help write a similar set of best practices for archives about how to think about generative AI and then how to move forward. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, fantastic. Next up is Tatjana.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tatjana Mladenovic. I'm a lead data manager at BBC Archives, working together with Richard Jolly on building a data platform for the archives. So as Richard mentioned, we are very much interested in using AI, but also in training the models using our own data as well. And I also volunteer as a chair of the European Broadcasting Union's AI and metadata group. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for your introduction. I think it's clear that Dale wasn't overselling the excellence in our panel. And special thank you to Stephanie for waking up early to join us. And first question to you, if it's okay, in relation to the practice guidelines that you published. How can documentaries transparently communicate the use of AI? What came up in your discussions?
Yeah, so I mean, we started with saying, with asking, what are the issues with using generated elements in your documentaries, and how is that different from using authentic audiovisual resources? So just a little bit of background, and then I'll get into the transparency. Basically, my co-directors, Rachel Antel and Jennifer Petroselli, were working on a longitudinal study of American history, and they were really surprised to see some images in the cut. And it wasn't until they went to the director and said, "Hey, we've been looking for these images for a year and a half. Where did you find them?" And he said, "Well, I generated them on Midjourney." And they were like, that just raised a lot of existential questions about our work as archival producers and about documentary in general, about the trust of audiences. And also it happened that the images that they generated were of a 19th century woman, and she looked suspiciously like Angelina Jolie with a 20-inch waist, and she was stunningly beautiful. And so it also proved the algorithmic bias that is within generative AI. So that's why we really started our initiative. So we say that, if you can't find primary sources, which have very much, of course, bias, but their own value, because their sources can be known. If you do want to use generative AI in your documentary, of course, you can do front and end of show language, talking very specifically about your generative AI use to really let your audience in and engage them in the process of why you decided to use these tools. Other ways are for a narrator or character to reveal the use. Another is to use a sort of visual cue in the same way that reenactments and recreations they're known. There are these methods, these cinematic methods that are known. So when we're watching a film about the American Revolution, for example, and there's a reenactment, we know that there wasn't any footage during the American Revolution, but things look in a way that you can see that this was a reenactment. So we encourage a similar type of care done with generative AI elements. And then a big part of transparency, we break it into both being transparent with your team and then being transparent with the audience. So I was just talking about ways you can be transparent with the audience, which can be very creative and as creative as a director. But then being transparent with your team is also really important. As you know, documentaries can take anywhere from 2 to 25 years to 50 years to make. And so keeping track along the way of what has been generated so that there is no confusion later on is a really important thing. So for that reason, we made a toolkit, a best practices toolkit, which includes a sample cue sheet that people can use to track their generative AI use as they work on their film. And then just last thing, I mean, something that's very confusing for filmmakers is generative AI tools are now baked into the software that we use to make films. So you can easily go and use generative fill on a photograph in Adobe Photoshop or in Adobe Premiere. And soon you'll be able to use generative extend to extend moving image shots as well. So making sure that everyone on your team knows what is authentic and what is hybrid, and making sure that your audience knows that, but also just making sure that as filmmakers, we know you are changing authentic audiovisual materials when you're making them hybrid in this way. Yeah, so those are some of the ways I really encourage you and hope that you check out the guidelines and share them with any productions you know that are using generative AI.
I really enjoyed reading the guidelines. I'm just curious about the different types that you outlined. What is the most in vogue? What is the most used method?
I'd say the most used is top and end of show language. However, I think that what can be lost there is if something is excerpted or somebody doesn't, read the credits at the beginning or the end, which I think is very, very common. Someone, tunes in on a broadcast or presses play on Netflix, they go to get a snack, you're going to miss it. So we say that if you're going to use top and end of show language, you should definitely, that's one method, and you should employ others. So there's that. And then people are really getting creative. So take a film like Welcome to Chechnya by David France, which is an extraordinary look at gay men who are fleeing genocide, basically, in Chechnya. And what he used was, with the consent of the participants in the film and the consent of actors, he overlaid, using generative AI, the faces of actors onto the men that he was filming in order to protect their identities. And I think that is about to become more and more common. And another way that things are really being used is in audio. So I really think that, watermarks on things that are being used, especially at this time when there's so little media literacy around what is generative AI, it's very confusing for people to go the extra mile to be very transparent. But yeah, I'd say that in that top and end of show language is very common. And also in the use, there are a few other uses that are very common, but how people are transparent is very much up for debate and rumination in the coming years.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this will develop. And you mentioned that indeed AMIA has a special interest group where but this is all shared. So that's also a good resource to be aware of. Let me just change gears a little bit and go to Tatjana. We just mentioned GenAI being used in documentaries, but also this concept of tracking provenance is important in archiving as well. So I'm curious, what are the strategies that archives can implement to handle AI content in their asset management systems or catalogs?
Thank you. This is really, really important to us, obviously, and it's and there are many standards that are being worked on and put in place to capture the provenance of the content. And be transparent, as Stephanie said. That's basically really important, but not just transparent, but also do it in a programmatic way so that the systems as well as people can read information. And the first standard that I would like to mention is C2PA. So that's a standard that binds provenance to information to media content, be it images or video content and so on. And any manipulation with that content is recorded in this metadata that is binded with the media and travels together with media as you send it to from one place to another or from one organization to another. I will later on put a link in the chat to C2PA page where people can get more information about this. It's also, sorry.
No, go on, sorry.
So it's also really important for the organizations themselves to build data platform and data models that can capture and store this information in a very useful way so that they can retrieve it whenever they need to. And again, standards can help there because, again, you may need to exchange this information with other organizations. And it's really, I would like to mention that SMPTE, which is Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, they have started working on standards to capture in metadata the information about AI. And that means not only that a certain piece of content has been generated by AI, but more details around what kind of AI has been used, what version, and so on, and in a very standard way. So that's again something I can put links to some webinars by SMPTE. Yes, this is the work that, to my knowledge, has recently just started. So it's worth keeping tracks and following it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And you are connected also to EBU.
Yes.
And I'm curious. So there's I've been reading up on the C2PA and looking also at the sort of the big tech companies that's also signed up to use it. But can you talk a little bit about the adoption of C2PA? What are, in your view, like maybe broadcasters or other like media entities that we can take inspiration from?
Yes, so C2PA is endorsed by EBU. EBU is very much involved in promoting the standard. So and we can tell that the standard is only as good as how adopted it is, because if it's not widely adopted, it's not going to be really useful. So that C2PA standard started by the work by Adobe and Microsoft together with the BBC. So there are some backings already by some large commercial companies, and also there are quite a few quite a few companies that have built it in cameras, so that it's already captured when the content has been filmed or a photo has been taken. But obviously, it needs really wide adoption to be useful elsewhere.
Yeah, can you talk maybe a little bit about how the C2PA standard would be sort of presented to an end user? What would, if I would go to a piece of content online, how would I be able to track the authenticity?
Yes, so there are tools that allow you, that give you an information right on the website that you can see the metadata linked with a piece of content. There's a really nice demo video on SMPTE on a C2PA page where it kind of demos this approach. So yes, so this is the how user can say it, but also there are programmatic ways of how you can read this information with using your own software and store it in your own systems.
Yeah, and I think also the European AI Act is now making this labeling required. Maybe Matt, you can speak a little bit about that, share your insights.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Article 50 of the new Act. Providers of AI systems that generate synthetic content such as images, audio, text, they have to ensure that the outputs of the AI system are marked in a machine-readable form and that the outputs are detectable. And then deployers of the AI systems, or people actually putting them on the market, if it's an image, audio, or video, where it's actually a deep fake, they have to disclose the content has been artificially generated and manipulated. But there are exceptions. So, for example, where the output is clearly artistic, creative, satirical, or fictional, you have to inform people in an appropriate way that won't hamper the display or enjoyment of the work. But I think for news in particular, if you're generating text, which is published for the purpose of informing the public on matters of public interest, you need to disclose that it's AI generated unless you have human oversight, editorial work done on it, or if a company stands behind it editorially, like let's say the BBC. I think there's also a requirement that the AI office shall work on codes of practice for this sort of labeling. And we're also seeing private moves. So TikTok, for example, in its use requirements says you have to label AI generated or AI edited media that shows realistic appearing scenes, for example.
Yeah, I'm really curious how the legislators are going to monitor the uptake of this, because it seems there is a lot of it is law, but how will it be monitored? Do you think that C2PA, for instance, can help with monitoring, Matt?
I think C2PA is a technical solution to the requirements. So the problem is they need to penalize bad actors who in some way aren't labeling it. And when it comes to deep fakes, they may have a very vested interest in not labeling it. So it will be about the bandwidth of the regulators to actually check this, enforce this, and find bad actors.
Yeah, a lot of bad actors on the web. Unfortunately, that's not going away. Let's go to Johanne and to Richard. From the standpoint of public broadcasting, how are you, managing copyright and authenticity issues of your material? Maybe start with Johanne.
Yes, well, I can totally back what Tatjana just said about like identifying AI generated materials, declaring it both to the humans reading in our archives and the machines. So that's like part of what we're working on when generative AI has come in place regarding our programs. We're also working on labeling the AI content that is in our archives, but which is not like the programs itself, saying transcriptions or AI generated metadata. So we know how this content has been created, where it has been created, which versions of a dedicated software has created, say, this transcriptions or another. So like trying to track and the origin of the materials is like key in what we do.
Yeah, I think similar to what Stephanie mentioned earlier about that this is both towards the audience but also to the teams. How did your broadcaster inform the sort of creators that they are sort of let's say required to also keep track of this information?
Should I answer? I'll give an answer from my side. So the BBC, I think like many organizations are trying to do two things: maintain trust, maintain provenance, understand how we're using it, how our suppliers are using it, but also get some benefit, right? Either through commercial exploitation of data for machine learning training, or through just efficiencies in the organization. So we're trying to sort of balance like encouraging experimentation while maintaining trust, maintaining provenance. So particularly how we communicate to suppliers and also internally, because it's very similar. There's not a lot of difference there. The BBC's got 9 AI principles which are published, and they're sort of grouped in 3 categories. One is around sort of public value, public service, making sure that you're still acting to those core principles of public service. Second, about using it to support creativity, not replace creativity. So respecting rights, but also not doing things like replacing someone's job with a cheaper AI or alternative. And thirdly, about transparency. So that's as Tatjana and Stephanie were talking about, and Matt, making sure we can label things both to the audience and to having machine readable tracking. So these 9 principles are very useful because they give a sort of overall guide, and then there's of course lots more guidance specifically about news and factual content, documentaries, that basically AI should not be GenAI should not be used as in the norm. That there are exceptional cases, that sort of face swapping to preserve privacy that Stephanie mentioned. That would be a good example where it's appropriate, but you need to make it clearly labeled. So I think these 9 principles are a really good guideline. They give you a sort of sense of what you're trying to achieve, but then of course you go to the detail and that becomes very complicated. is the GenAI fill, like, is that a sort of, that's the kind of thing that you just might not even notice that you're using. So it's very complicated. I think once you get down to the detail, what's supportive, what's assisting technology versus what's replacing or, actually creative technology. So a lot of challenge in the details. And I don't think that, no one's got this worked out yet in the BBC. A lot of guidelines are still in process about how to, what data to capture from suppliers and what guidance to give them. That there's still a lot to do there.
Yeah, maybe question to maybe, well, all panelists, let's say. I'm a big fan of collecting AI principles. I'm bookmarking them everywhere that I can find them, because it also informs the way that we think about it in our archive. I'm curious how these AI principles come to be. Is it done, let's say, is one department, let's say the legal department, responsible for them? Is it much more grassroots? Are people also engaging with the audiences and setting those AI principles? Who would like to respond to this? Johanne.
Yeah, so here at DR we have we have a group of I don't know what to call it, managers, who are discussing how we handle AI at DR. It's across technology, news, archives, marketing, and our guidelines has sprung out from there. So they have initiated that we have those guidelines, and they are following up and revisioning those guidelines. Our guidelines are mainly focused on publishing. What do we publish? We cannot publish content that is generated by AI unless there is as some of you have said, a certain reason for it. But how about all those corner cases? How about ChatGPT giving input to a text, and how do we work with that? So,
yeah. Who else would like to respond to this?
Hi.
Stefan would like to.
Yes, I believe he's not seeing me. That's why it's not working with raising the hand. So, hi, I just wanted to mention that maybe we come to these answers based on our 3 pillars, I would say, like strategy, AI strategy, governance and compliance, and our AI guidelines that are more operational focused. Yeah, and somewhere in between these things, you find all of these answers, hopefully, in regards of the use cases. Yeah. All of these documents, pillars, will stay developing documents, so to say, for the next at least 2 years, I'm sure. Yeah, but that's also a good thing, I would say. So, but that's how we approach it.
Yeah. Also, Stefan, being responsible for innovation at public broadcasting in Austria, I'm curious. So those principles are probably not stable, as much of what we are talking about isn't stable. It's always in flux. So
yeah, is anything stable anymore?
If you reflect a little bit on this work, what do you see in the, let's say, the medium-term future as principles that will be well, maybe changing, or what will be added to it?
Yeah, it's always the easy answers I get questions. So let me start by maybe look, if you me not coming from public service broadcasting initially, I was looking especially at the past of PSMs, so to say. And if you look at the past of PSMs, there is a strong history of innovation, actually. Yeah, and in regards of archives, yeah, there's also a strong history of being a cultural memory, yeah, or some type of cultural memory in regards of these entities, companies, yeah, and now talking about, I don't know, deploying generative AI, for example, yeah, I believe there's a huge responsibility also in balancing innovation and responsibility, So I would say, first, we need to, so to say, harness innovation boldly, I would say, because there is no other option, actually. in regards of, I don't know, competition, for example, big platforms, new emerging players in regards of AI, who would have thought about these companies 3 years ago that are suddenly big players in, let's call it search, content search, how information is delivered and stuff like that. Yeah. And I believe one of the, or second, very important is that our entities, our companies are ensuring that the trust stays or remains our asset, so to say. Yeah, that's also where we come from, or where we came from, and what's our asset. And also in regards of the discussion before C2PA stuff like that, there is a, in the end, it's about trust also in regards of these discussions, or maybe standards. Yeah, and yeah, how do we approach it? As I said, there are 3 pillars, but I could say I believe it's important to embed some type of transparent governance throughout the company. It's also a balancing act, I would say, because it's a complicated framework, I would say. A company that big, or broadcasters that are pretty complicated companies also. You need to find the right balance between governance and how you can live this in an operational reality, I would say.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It also reminds me a bit of what Richard mentioned when he was talking about experimentation. I think there's a lot of sort of individuals that are experimenting, and there's also a lot of sort of fear of missing out for not using the technology. You know, it's there, people are using it. And I'm curious to what extent, you know, when experimentation becomes more like mainstream or used in an organization, are organizations also looking at the technology itself? Like Adobe was mentioned, OpenAI was mentioned. At what point are organizations, be it like public broadcasting, you know, having public, more public responsibility, choosing one sort of technology over the other? Is that the conversation that is had at the broadcasters?
I don't think we are there yet, actually, to choose the one over the other, to be honest. I believe we are still seeing a developing market in terms of possible service providers, and we are still seeing huge potential in developing, let's call it our own models. What I mean by that is like sub-training stuff, so not from the ground up, building our own models, but building up skills to do that inside of your company. So I wouldn't say we are there yet.
Yeah. Stephanie,
Yeah.
and Gary, yes. Stephanie
Oh,
first.
I just wanted to add to that something. I'm, you know, beyond implementation, that part of the reason that we started the APA AMIA interest group is there's also, we need education for archives around this. And something that I fear is that larger archives that have more resources are going to be able to implement these standards, and then those archives and those collections will be favored by broadcasters or streamers such as Netflix or things like that, that you need to have authenticated in a very specific way material in order to end up in a film. So I think that it's a really important time to make models and technologies that smaller archives, perhaps that don't have legal counsel, that don't have an IT department, that don't have this, can make sure that they're keeping up to a certain degree, or else certain parts of history might not be licensable or might not be accessible. So just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, thank you. Gary?
Yeah, I mean, just from a sort of production group perspective, you know, we're devising our policies, we're sort of tweaking them, looking at them, but it's incredibly important for us because, you know, when you staff up a production, you have a number of freelancers who all like different tools. So we are looking at what the approved tools are around the group without trying to sort of step on innovation. Of course, we want to be across what all the tools are, but also, you know, it's really important to us, and we'll get onto this as well with the licensing, that the tools that are being used, the training on that has been ethically sourced. but they are tools that support our industry. And then, I mean, the other thing that's quite interesting around the sort of broadcaster standards, which are all there for perfectly good reasons and very supportive of. But if you look at the way that TV is financed these days, you'll have a commissioning broadcaster, and they will have a certain set of rules, which of course the producers will adhere to. But then we'll go to license that show in multiple territories to make up the deficit in the budget. And where we can't end up is a whole range of different spins on this. There has to be ultimately, and it will come in time, but there has to be an underlying principle behind this, because otherwise what the BBC might agree in their commissioning document might be different from what ABC in Australia want and what PBS want, and so on, and it's sort of too late because the show's in the can at that point. So if you can't license to those regulations, then you effectively kill a production industry, which is quite concerning.
Yeah. Any final remarks before we close this first block? Yeah, Matt, go.
Just briefly, I mean, and I endorse everything I've heard about the importance of trust in the archive, to make sure that anything that is AI generated in the archive is clearly labeled as such. I just wanted to raise the other issue of whether there's any copyright in something that's AI generated. That goes to the value of the archive, and also the importance of being able to filter out AI generated material. If, looking ahead to the next block, you're looking to license material for AI training, they don't want AI generated material, because they end up with a sort of downward spiral and so-called model collapse if they start training AI on its own outputs. But in short, this direction of travel is that a pure AI generated output is probably not protected by copyright. So that part of the documentary won't in fact attract copyright. The documentary as a whole will still be copyrighted as a compilation. But and Gary talked about working with freelancers. You've got to be careful about the terms. I mean, are people warranting that they own all the copyright and they're assigning it to you or licensing it to you? So that does need to be considered.
Yeah. Okay, thanks so much. I think this concludes our first block. So we spoke about handling Gen AI generated content. We're now doing a small comfort break.
Need to say one thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just need to tell the observers that we get a lot of links from the panelists, and we are not able to post them immediately in the chat, but we will collect them all and send an email afterwards.
Yeah, thanks so much. So the next block will be about allowing archives to be used for Gen AI training. We already touched upon it a little bit near the end there. I propose we break for 7 minutes, so we'll be back 10 to the hour. Okay, super. I see that the presenters are back. Let's change. Let's talk now about another quite pressing topic: allowing archives to be used for GenAI training. The Fiat IFTA the Fiat IFTA treasurer and head of archives at RSI Broadcasting, Brecht de Klerk, he wrote a fantastic piece about it a few months ago that you can access on the Fiat IFTA website. Just giving a heads up there. And also people that would like to ask questions to the panelists. So we will be talking about this topic for around 30 minutes, and then we have time for Q&As. We are receiving a number of very good questions for the Q&A, but please continue sharing them in the chat. We will pick it up later. But first, let's dive in. I'd love to hear from Matt first. Could you perhaps outline the key legal and ethical considerations when licensing archival materials for GenAI training?
Yeah, great, will do. I'll touch on copyright, privacy, licensing terms, and comment a bit on the ethics. So on copyright, the first question is what acts relating to generative AI are in fact copyright infringements, and that the big buckets there is training copyright infringement, is the model itself a copy, and are the outputs infringement. Now, I would say there's some consensus that a similar or exact output of an AI where it's similar or exactly the same as an input, that will require a license. But there is real and I think genuine debate over whether training and models themselves are infringements. And this debate is really being driven by litigation in respect of publicly accessible works. And this is because large language models and diffusion models have been trained on large parts of the public internet, but there haven't been any decisions in that. And I think it's fair to say that training definitely involves copying in a copyright sense. It involves downloading an image, making a local copy. It involves translating it from maybe text into tokens, or if it's an image, adding progressively more noise as part of that training. So the debate is really about whether there are relevant copyright exceptions. And in the US, that's fair use. And in other countries, there are specific exceptions like temporary copying and text and data mining. Now, for an archive, if it's not publicly accessible in the same way, you can agree anything you like. You don't even have to have any copyright. But once someone has to pay to get access, you can make sure that they do pay for that, regardless of whether there's a debate over whether it's infringement. But that public debate about infringement will inform issues of price and expectations and the relevance of third-party rights in the archive. So let's look first at that. So rights in the works. So the archive has to ask who owns those rights. And for audiovisual assets, that can be extremely complicated. And Gary's nodding, and I'm sure will be far more expert than I am on the multifactorial questions when it comes to who owns rights in such assets. Or if the archive is a licensee who's able to sub-license, what rights do they have to sub-license? And do those rights in fact cover AI training? And do they cover the other big bucket, which is display? Can you license someone to be able to display something from the archive? Can you meet the requirements of a license? So in open source licenses, for example, there's often a requirement to attribute to the original author. Can an AI in fact comply with that? And are there specific restrictions? For example, again, you often see licenses which say no military use. So is the AI going to be used for a particular application? And we're in a world of foundation models where the AI could be used for anything. And so it's much more difficult going into the license to make sure you're specifying where and where it can't be used. There's also an issue about moral rights, certainly when it comes to display to outputs. So that's the sort of introduction to copyright. Privacy, all copyright works in an archive, some of them are going to contain personal data. That could just be the name of an author, or if it's news reportage, it could be highly sensitive personal data about a criminal conviction or something of that nature. So some sort of data protection impact assessment should be done. You should be figuring out the legal basis for processing that personal data, and you need to do a balancing assessment of how to balance that legal interest with the interests of the data subjects. There are also some practical problems when it comes to AI. It's very hard to see how AI complies with the right to be forgotten. When retraining an AI on a piece of to exclude a piece of personal data might cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, some of the complexity there can be illustrated with the Garante, the Italian regulator's decision about Getty and OpenAI. They looked at their data protection impact assessment. The legal basis for OpenAI using the news archive was identified as journalism, and the Garante said it wasn't journalism when it came to OpenAI. So they were technically in some sort of breach, it looked like. So that's an example of how well-resourced and well-advised companies can run into friction with a regulation they need to resolve it. I think the answer to this is to develop herd immunity. This isn't a zero-sum game. We need to get rights holders together and AI developers together to discuss best practice, because that's what the regulator wants. They don't want one person to win by having the best data protection impact assessment. They need people to come together and figure out how to do this properly. I'll turn now briefly to terms. Now we're seeing terms for AI licensing, which from the full gamut, from an access-only agreement, we give you access to this material, we give you no warranties at all. You are at risk if you use it, all the way through to we indemnify you up to multi-millions of dollars if you use our material, because we warrant that we are the owner and we're allowed to do that. This is a new area of licensing, and there are a lot of new entrants who've never dealt with IP before. So we are really looking at developing best practice. It doesn't exist yet. And this is impacted by ongoing litigation. So some of the big tech companies, even if they come to you and license, they will be very cautious about saying that the license is really about access and maybe display, depending on what you're authorizing. And they might have tried to avoid any implication that you're licensing training, because they want to maintain a position that isn't infringement in the first place and doesn't require a license. And then finally on ethics, this is highly complicated, and it is a huge interest, the societal benefits of AI versus its impact on existing stakeholders and creatives. It's very hard to predict the outcomes because AI is so disruptive and is developing so quickly in its potential. So we are also seeing long-term negative trends on the creative sector, where revenue for individual creators is falling, and we have issues like buyouts in the media, which has nothing to do with AI, but is eroding earning power. And we're also seeing issues of the long-term viability of, let's say, the news media. So AI has come into this and sort of accelerated some of those issues. But there is a real ethical debate, and that has been seen in the UK recently in a consultation on AI and IP. There are no easy wins, there are no clear answers, and we need a sophisticated and nuanced discussion. At the moment, the parties are so polarized that I'd say the EU AI Act and the UK consultation are basically making no headway on compromises. But the big issues on ethics are, first of all, generative AI is a threat to livelihood, it's a threat to news media, and it is arguably a threat to human dignity when it starts to create in a way that only humans used to create. So what are the issues here? It's not only compensation, it's also whether you have a right as a creative or an archive owner to object in principle to AI training. And I think even where a rights holder has all of the necessary rights, this is also a question of hearts and minds, and rights holders should be speaking to the upstream authors, the originators of that copyright, to consult with them. Richard mentioned the BBC principles that AI should only support and not replace creativity. So that's all consultation needed, and maybe even revenue sharing. We are seeing examples of that. So that's a very high level, quick canter through.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So out of curiosity, so without naming the clients of the company you work for, Human Native, I'm curious if you look at the type of content producer that are interested in, say, collaborating or making arrangement with AI companies. Are they commercial? Are they independent producers or also public broadcasts? What kind of content producers are interested in having their collections, open for AI training?
So we are a business to business, so we're not dealing with individual creators or authors. We are dealing with people who have an archive, etc. But within that self-constraint, I would say it is the absolute gamut of rights holders are looking at this. And for some, it's an existential issue, and for some, it's a bonus, a new form of revenue which won't affect their normal day-to-day activities, but it could be a nice revenue stream they can add to their normal activities. So yeah, and in terms of scale, we are talking to music labels with a few thousand tracks up to major broadcasters.
Yeah, and on the other side of this marketplace, is this also our most big AI companies interested in working with archival collections?
Yeah, 100%. And I would say that the real sweet spot at the moment, practically, because so much can be scraped from the public internet, is things that cannot be obtained in that way. And that falls into two categories: stuff that just isn't there at all, or stuff that's there but not in the right format or quality. So let's say it's music. If you have music in what's called stem separated formats, all the instruments on separate tracks, that's more valuable for training than what might be scraped as a single track in lower quality online.
Yeah. How do you see this market evolve, Matt?
Do you want to be more specific?
There's one argument to say that, if you have maybe another way to maybe let me phrase this question differently. What these types of collaborations, they are not one-offs. It's like a license-based. So it's not. Go on. Sorry.
I mean, AI can be used for really any human activity at the moment. So it is hard to predict how all of the uses will all come about. But I would say that at the moment, it is very much based on a diversity of languages. So they've got a lot of English, so they're looking for other languages. It's also specialist content. So let's say scientific publishing, something like that. Where they've trained on the general internet, which is a pretty messy place and has some very low quality and high quality information, but they'd like to be able to focus on high quality information. But that's just things which are outputting, as it were, information. We also have lots of AI companies who are creating avatars of people, and they are desperate to have the human voice in realistic conversational situations. So huge demand for audio from, let's say, radio broadcast or TV broadcast. So there's so many potential use cases. Now, your question of one-off or evolving, clearly factual information should be ongoing, should be sustainable. So they want a news organization to give them an API to their constant feed of output so that they have constant information. Will an avatar become so good it never needs to be refined anymore? I doubt it. I think culture, our ways of interacting, our mores, everything changes all the time. And I think AI will always need that data. So I predict sustainable licensing relationships.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's go to Gary. Gary, from the production and distribution perspective, what opportunities and risks do you see allowing AI companies to train on catalogs of content?
Yeah, I mean, it's an area we're really interested in. For full transparency, we haven't done any deals yet. And that, I think, is because we want to get this absolutely right as we explore it. It's about having the clarity of the rights going into this. It's about understanding the potential outcomes and usage. And then it's working hand in hand with our producers and ensuring that everybody is comfortable with the positions and the risks being taken with this. So we're sort of, watching very closely, talking to a handful of companies, but, being very responsible rather than rushing in. But equally, the first half of this conversation was, about the actual usage of AI tools. And I talked a little bit about the importance of ethically sourced tools. And if we want tools to be ethically sourced, clearly we need to be open to licensing material into these tools for them to train. Otherwise, you don't have any ethically sourced tools. So there's a bit of a virtuous circle there. So we're very much interested. We very much want to be part of this, but we've got to get a lot of the sort of underlying rights, a lot of the stuff that Matt talked about, in terms of what is the legislative position over fair use, for example, because that will impact on pricing as well. It will impact on what will go out to market, the whole ethical thing. All of these considerations are on the table.
Yeah. And then there's, I'm not sure if people in the panel can comment on pricing, if there's sort of published knowledge about what are the sort of the properties that will constitute a license deal, let's say. How do you reach an agreement?
I mean, what I can say is we're being quoted a range, and it tends to be on a minutage basis, and if I go back to the middle of last year, people were talking sort of $6-7 a minute. This year, I've had everything from half a dollar a minute through to $2 or $3 a minute. We haven't done any of these deals, but I think people are quite openly talking numbers as you sort of get to the table. I think there's a lot of content that have been to answer one of your previous questions, Johan. I think that YouTube has got into this quite early in that creator space because the rights position is a lot more straightforward. If you are a YouTube creator, you own that material outright. Effectively, it's your image. So I think a lot of those needs have been met. I mean, our hope is, and again, to Matt's point, that the request will now become a little bit more specialist, a little bit more nuanced, and then that will determine what the pricing looks like.
Yeah. Matt?
I can't talk about our deals, but you will see various publicly stated deals. They've often been in the newspaper industry, and it's typically a sort of $10 million deal for a 2 to 3 year tie-up for access. But there's also payment in kind where they're giving their tools to the newspaper. I think Shutterstock publicly reported making about $103 to $104 million in 2023 on licensing its images for AI training. In publishing, I think one of the highest I saw was Taylor Francis. I think was around the $75 million dollar mark for its archive. So that's the sort of money we're seeing publicly. And I think the other point to riff on what Gary was saying about this range of prices is we're certainly seeing that AI companies want more information about the quality of the data to allow them to make a return on investment decision. And we're building the sort of statistical tools that the AI developer would like to see applied to the data to help them figure out how valuable it would be to their performance.
Yeah. Stefan, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thanks. Maybe one perspective in regards of I believe you're all aware of the last OpenAI GPT image model. We have all seen suddenly images very close to this Ghibli studio, animation studio, stuff like that, right? So, and I believe everybody was pretty much on the same page that this is somehow ethically not okay. So, and it's obvious that it's coming from some training data based on this life's work, so to say, yeah. So, saying this, I believe it would be it would be very important to license outputs of these systems, machines, whatsoever. Yeah, like I don't think that the input licensing deal is what we are seeking for in the midterm, in the end. I don't know, whatever the end means. Yeah, but if they are scraping, you have to imagine they are trained on the whole internet. Yeah, this amount of data, however this is possible, nobody could explain this to me until yet. But I believe they will, whoever they are, will scrape anything anyway. Yeah, and we somehow need to make sure that outputs will be licensed, and this is actually also regulated. Otherwise, I don't know.
Matt?
So just a couple of points on that. Let's say Studio Ghibli, I totally agree that the natural inference is that it was trained on copyright works that had emanated from Studio Ghibli. The danger in copyright is it doesn't really protect style at all. And indeed, that's a point of debate in the US, whether to introduce any protection for style. So licensing of the outputs when what you've taken is style at the moment is really in the zone of ethics rather than law.
No, of course, but I believe you have to change the narrative, so to say, with this technology, yeah, because it's obvious that it's based on this work, you know, and so regulation needs also to change, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that takes a long time, and to be effective,
so
it
we
would need to be international as well.
Push.
So I think it's very important that we as a community do not give up licensing at the input level. And I think when it comes to archives that are non-public, you have that control already built in. And
I'm not saying give it up, but
okay,
I believe
good.
it's not the most important thing. Yeah, in the future, the output will be the thing we make money off, or license holders.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're also saying to our producers is yes, let's look at this space, but these are the risks, and it's very difficult. I mean, you know, as I say, we haven't closed any deals yet. We haven't got anywhere near that yet. But one of the key things that we're looking to understand as we license into these models is what the output or the proposed output is. And I think what we'll find is that the level of information you get back on that will vary. And then it's really, you know, what risk you want to take as the copyright holder in terms of entering that deal. But you're absolutely right, Stefan. It is, you know, you're both right, but it is as part of your deal trying to understand or get a grasp on what the output and usage of this content is.
Yeah. There's also maybe to Richard. I read this report. This was quite some time ago that BBC was also considering training their own AI models. Is that can you talk a bit about that?
So, yeah, I was thinking. I mean, the dangers that everybody's been describing about licensing content for foundational training, I think, are really important, really, really real. When the BBC's talked about training our own model. There's been a lot of internal experiments to do this. Typically, it's not, you know, foundational training, it's reweighting a model where you can reweight it. So that's obviously a lot, it's a different task, and I don't know what the sort of rights implications are there, but if you're reweighting it for internal use, which is what we've been doing, then it feels a lot safer. So typically this has been mostly still in the experimental stage, but it's been about trying to see if we can mimic, and this is mostly done by BBC R&D and other teams in the BBC, not directly by Tatjana or myself, but typically to sort of see if we can mimic in-house BBC styles. So can you sort of reproduce the BBC editorial tone and sort of maintain factual quality for something like translations or summarization, that kind of thing. In the archives, we're particularly interested in classification. So using either just foundational models or BBC trained weighted models to classify archive material. And then because we have a closed archive, either just being clear about the being transparent that this is a you know, AI generated classification or summarization or translation or whatever, or having a human in the loop step where you can approve it and thus up the confidence.
Yeah. Tatjana, with your BBC and also EBU hat on, so what do you see in other European broadcasters in this space?
So we recently had EBU organized a conference called Data Technology Seminar that was in March, and it's about using new emerging data technologies. So there was a lot about AI, and we had a very strong presence of archives, because archives are really important and interesting for AI, both for training, but also for the use of AI within the archives to unlock the content that we've got. So there's been a lot of interest in using AI to generate metadata, but also this very important need that there needs to be the provenance needs to be maintained. It needs to be understood and known that a certain metadata has been generated by AI, but also there needs to be a human in the loop, somebody who is going to check and maintain that the output of AI is what we expect, which is not just being correct, but also in line with, public service values and so on. There is obviously there's a lot of excitement about applying AI. It's something that the large language models have really democratized the use of AI. So because it's so, in the past, you needed a lot of time and effort and a lot of content and expertise to build your own models. Now, if you use large language models, you get a lot of that for very little investment. And that's opened up the use of AI for a lot of smaller organizations, and it's very exciting time, I think, to be working at the archives at this point. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the risks, about both legal and reputational and copyrights and so on. But what is really, I think what we've seen a lot is a lot of experimentation, a lot of investigation, with at the same time a lot of concern and interest in how do we use this technology, how do we properly use it, how do we understand it, how do we adopt it to our own values, how do we still retain trust, as everybody has said here before. And there's a lot of, I believe there's a lot of interest in collaboration, in all of us working together on building, common frameworks and standards and, approaches to how do we use AI.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm still a little bit, thanks so much. Stefan's point about the Gimli just reminds me what an incredible waste it is if such a trend appears and everybody is generating those same images. It's a big cost that we should also find solutions for. Stephanie, I'm curious, are there also producers in your network that are actually saying, we are not going to use Gen AI at all. We are going to really, stay away from it. It's going to be one of our distinguishing features to actually not engage with technology like this.
Yeah, it's actually something. There's a Leni Riefenstahl documentary that's about to come out, and I read a Guardian piece where the director said we actively do not want to engage with generative AI. But I think just to poke at the question a little bit, I think generative AI is now in most things that we use. So it's in our email, it's in our text messages, it's in, if we use upresing, if we, it's in color correction, it's in sound correction. It's really hard, because even if they say we're not going to generate images, it doesn't mean that they're not going to use AI tools to separate audio tracks, to take, music out of a news broadcast or something like that. So it's something that we're trying to do at the Archival Producers Alliance, is we've stepped in and are just educating filmmakers on all of these topics that you're talking about copyright, about risk, about, when you take a stance, there's so much now that you need to know about AI that it's whether we like it or not, it is integrated into the tools that we use because we write emails. So, yeah.
100%. Okay, we have 2 questions, and I think after that we have to wrap it up. I think, Gary, you beat Richard with a quarter of a
just quarter of a second. I mean, I was just going to add, from a production group perspective, we aren't looking at this as a sort of way of cutting out that human element, I think we would still believe there is a premium in that, in those human ideas, in a high touch human production, albeit assisted by AI. As you say, this is built into tools. There's things that in the past would have just been machine learning, or we might have just done somehow with a graphics tool, that are now falling into AI packages. So I can't see a world where we wouldn't use AI at all, but I think there is definitely a premium in a human touch, human-led production.
Yeah. Richard.
I just think it's an excellent point that the Gen AI technologies are going to be absolutely everywhere. So we still need to be have that focus, as Matt was saying, on what are the ethical implications. And I think the sort of principles-led approach, although it doesn't solve all of the problems, is really helpful to sort of say what are we actually trying to protect here. We've got our legal considerations, our copyright considerations, but really trust, transparency, public service. These are the kind of things that we need to make sure, and supporting creativity, that we're sort of doing at every step. And if we have those kind of guidelines and ideas in mind, then that can help us navigate, not always successfully, but help us a little bit in these very tricky gray areas.
Yeah.
Just want to, before we go to Stefan, it also, sometimes it won't be filmmakers' choice. Licensing archive is becoming increasingly expensive. Also, I know in the US, if you, for example, want to license ABC footage, but you're not making a documentary for a Disney-owned company, it's going to be much more expensive. So, we were told early on when we were doing this work by one of our members that an executive at an entertainment company told her to generate archival B-roll because it is less expensive. Now, we need regulation. We need to understand copyright issues. We need to understand a lot around that. But I think that's a major consideration. And recently, we've been involved with rewriting part of the core app that documentary filmmakers use to apply for funding, along with Sundance and the International Documentary Association. And most people say they would use generative AI to help with cost. So unless archive is approachable, it might be replaced as a sort of reenactment, because people might not understand. They're just trying to tell a story. So people might not understand the real risks and the ethical risks of using this material. So, yeah. But I agree. I mean, my hope is that, yes, documentaries that are using all authentic audiovisual and primary sources and engaging with a human-centered approach to filmmaking will be at a premium. But I'm also seeing the entire market for documentaries crater. So we need to keep that in mind. So sorry, Stefan, I interrupted.
All good, all good. You were mentioning cost cutting as one thing that a lot of companies are mentioning. I want to embrace that we should, especially, we are media companies. Yeah, we come from creative industries, or we are part of creative industries. We should think much more about creating new products, new product categories and stuff with these technologies. Yeah, of course, efficiency is important, especially for PSMs. In regards of funding, yeah, so this is clear. But in using this technology and using our archives and understanding our archives as some type of raw data for this technology, we really could create amazing new products or product categories we don't even think about today. And I'm convinced that this would be the thing we could win. That's where we come from. Yeah, we come from telling stories, creativity, stuff like that. Yeah, so others don't. Yeah, so let's embrace it. Yeah, could be good times ahead, and not only cost cutting discussions.
So you definitely hit the right nerve here. I was looking at there's a Q&A, and most of the questions that were raised are actually sort of addressed as we had our conversation. One recurring question is about all the links and all the documents that were mentioned. So they are captured in the chat, and as Louise said, we will be sharing all those links to all the participants. It's quite, I'm happy to report also to my fellow panelists that the amount of participants has been staying stable over the last 80 or so minutes, which is really great. It's like one of the success criteria. But with this, I would like to hand it back over to you, Dale, and to Louise to wrap it up. And thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Johan. So we've clearly covered a lot of ground, and thank you for the wide range of interest and perspectives on what's clearly a hot topic for our industry. I have been scribbling notes and I was going to try and summarize some of the key points, but we're a little against time. So I think the best thing we can do is send out a summary of the key points after the session, and share that with our community as well. So we'll do that. So I'll come back to you, Johan, in a moment for some final thoughts and comments maybe. But before I do, I just wanted to say that at FearIFTA, generative AI is an ongoing theme for us this year. It's one of our key themes. Today's session forms part of work we're doing to produce a paper and a set of guidelines for those involved in setting generative AI policies within their own organizations. And I took note of what Stephanie said about particularly smaller archives who might not have the bandwidth to concentrate on this, and hopefully we can be helpful to them. We already ran a survey of our membership for their thoughts on generative AI, which plays into this work, and some of our member organizations have shared their policy documents with us as well. So this is all leading towards this work. The panel session itself has provided us with further insights, and we intend to publish our paper in the autumn and present it at this year's FearIFTA conference. For the audience, we welcome further contributions to our work in this area. So if you would like to share any of your own thoughts and experiences, or indeed any further questions you might have arising from this session about GenAI, please feel free to get in touch with me or Johan or Louise. You can find us, all three of us, on LinkedIn or via the FearIFTA office. And if anyone is tuned in and you're not a FearIFTA member currently and will be interested in joining our organization, you can find all the information you need on the website, or again, get in touch with me or Louise and we can point you in the right direction. I mentioned the FearIFTA conference. This year takes place in Rome. So at least most of us are going for the food, if nothing else. And that will be during the last week of October. It is the premier global gathering for everyone working with media archives, and you'll find a lot of information about this year's conference themes on the website. So do take a look there. Hopefully we'll see some of you there as we continue this conversation on generative AI and AV archives. We'll wrap up with some closing statements, but finally from me, just a personal thank you to today's panelists for sharing your thoughts and experience with us and for being so generous with your time today. I really appreciate you agreeing to take part. A thank you to Nicole in the FearIFTA office, who is contending with a power outage in Spain and Portugal, which has affected our technology as we went into this. Thank you to Louise for co-producing the event with me, and a huge thanks to Johan for his, as usual, expert moderation. Louise, yes.
Can I just say one thing? There's a question about the recording. It will be available afterwards, together with all the links that the panelists sent to us. So it will be open to everyone afterwards.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah. And yes, and we will produce a summary that we'll include and send out after the event as well. So Johan, I'll come back to you. You've got 2 minutes left for any closing statements.
Well, there's one thought that comes to mind is that Matt, in his statement earlier, mentioned the word disruptive, and I think what we are talking about is definitely disruptive. But what I take away from this conversation is that, looking at the guidelines, looking at practices that people are sharing now, to be able to have this conversation, and that this conversation is happening, in different places, in different communities, builds this opportunity for archives to make an informed decision how to navigate this space. So and for the rest, just thanks for making the time and for listening, and looking forward to continue the conversation in Italy with some fresh pasta.
Great, thanks for having us.
Take care, bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.